Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Come with me as we step into the deep, dark forest of fear, and let's just hope that we live to see sunrise in the morning. Tonight's story, guys, is a fantastic and incredibly creepy Goatman story. Been a while since I covered one of these. I know a lot of you guys enjoy them. Of course, please do let me know down below in the comments as ever. Please do like and share. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Goatmans Bridge. Let's get straight into that. I'm sorry if this seems scattered and doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make much sense to me either, but I have to write this down somewhere so someone knows what happened in case things get worse. I'm not sure how that could happen, but after what I just experienced, I'm not sure what to expect anymore. I'm not sure how to begin this, so I guess I'll just start at the beginning. I spend a lot of my free time urban exploring. If you're not familiar with this, it usually involves finding old, abandoned buildings and, well, exploring them. I know it doesn't sound like much fun, but living in an old college town, there's not much fun to be had. See, I like to collect old relics. For example, recently I was exploring the old courthouse that was abandoned after the new one was built, and I found an old gavel. They're sort of like trophy. So, I don't have a shelf of golden athletes captured in the middle of kicking or throwing a ball, or framed certificates recognising high grades. So these old souvenirs are like what I like to show off. I usually do this alone since no one in my small circle of friends is interested in this sort of thing. They tell me it's creepy and that they're afraid to go into old buildings at night. I tell them that I always have a flashlight with me and plenty of batteries for backup. But that doesn't seem to bring them any comfort. I think they've seen one too many scary movies. Don't get me wrong, I love the horror genre, but I don't take any of that to heart. I don't believe in the supernatural or ghosts or spooky things like that. I like to go at night because it provides plenty of cover in case the local police department decides they want to come and do some exploring of their own. Like I said earlier, I live in an old college town. Being of college age, you would think it would be easier to meet like-minded people that share some of my interests. Apparently, I've discovered a niche when it comes to hobbies. That was until I met Harrelyn. I noticed her eating alone in our school's dining hall and decided to try and strike up conversation with her. I asked if I could sit down with her, and she reluctantly accepted with what I think was an eye roll, but I'm not sure. Either way, I took my seat and began asking her my best get-to-know-you questions. It was exactly what you'd expect given our surroundings. What's your name? Where are you from? What's your major? She was nice enough and answered my lame questions and returned a few of her own. I found out she was from East Texas and came here to study music to become a band director for any high school that would hire her, as she put it. She was desperate to get out of her small town and move to the city where she would never have to see a pine tree again. I thought things were going really well, and then she asked me what my hobbies were. If I'm honest, I figured this is where our conversation would end. I answered her question with barely any eye contact and some stammering. I told her about exploring and my collection of trophies, and to my surprise, she seemed kind of interested. She told me back home she was into paranormal investigations. I feigned interest since I think all of that is bullshit to begin with. But she had pretty eyes and an amazing smile. I guess my acting was pretty convincing, since she asked me if I wanted to join her soon on one of her investigations. I didn't really say yes, but I also didn't say no. I asked her where she was interested in going next, and she asked me if I had ever heard of Goatmans Bridge. I lived near this town my whole life. Of course I've heard of Goatmans Bridge. I've just never been there. If you aren't familiar with this local legend, I'll fill you in. The story goes there was a goat farmer by the name of Oscar Washburn in the 1930s who made a living by selling meat, milk, cheese and hides. He apparently did very well for himself and his family, and this did not settle well with the local Ku Klux Klan. You had to cross what was known as the Old Alton Bridge to get to his farm. So, to help his business, Washburn posted a sign on the bridge that read, "This way to Goatman." Well, this must have been the final straw for the local assholes, because late one night they broke into Washburn's home and dragged him to the old bridge, where they had a noose waiting for him. They mercilessly tightened the noose around his neck and flung him over the side of the bridge. When they went down to the riverbank below to confirm their murderous deed, they found nothing but an empty noose and undisturbed waters. Confused and still in a blind rage, they went back to Oscar's farm and burned down his home with his family still inside. Oscar was never found or seen again. My cell phone rang later that night, and I was kind of surprised to see if it was Harrelyn. I tried to answer with my smoothest, "Hey, how's it going?" She laughed at my attempt and told me she was going to Goatmans Bridge and wanted to know if I'd like to join her. I told her I was free as I closed my textbook, putting my homework on pause. She told me she would be at my place in 20 minutes. I get dressed and grab my backpack in case I find any souvenirs. My hopes were low for this, but best case scenario, that sign is still there and would look great on my wall. I hadn't told Harrelyn yet that I don't believe in paranormal or spiritual realm or whatever you want to call it. I figured I would let her know about my skepticism at a later date. I get a text letting me know she's waiting for me outside. So I head out the door and get into her car, throwing my bag into the back seat. As soon as she starts driving to Goatman's Bridge, she begins to unload about how excited she is for this. There's nothing like this back in East Texas. It's all just haunted houses with towers of Confederate soldiers or someone's dead grandma lurking in the attic. Boring. "So what are you hoping to find?" I ask her. "Are you kidding me?" she shouts. "I want to see the Goatman." "See him? I thought you just said that seeing old dead spirits is boring." She shoots me a side-eye glance. "I thought you knew all about this legend," she sarcastically mocked. I gave her a confused glance. She rolled her eyes and explained that this is different. She said that she'd never hunted a vengeful spirit before, and that she believes they are easier to communicate with. But if his body was never found, then how are you sure there's even a spirit to communicate with? Something happens that's beyond our understanding. When someone is murdered with that much hate, a piece of them is left behind that wants revenge, she explained. "And exactly why would you want to mess with someone who's that angry?" I asked, surprising myself that I'm even entertaining the thought of a ghost that can hold a grudge. "Spirits can't hurt the living," she stated. "We had to take a back road since the bridge has been shut down ever since they built a new one. We parked at the orange and white roadblocks and got out of the car to make the trek to the bridge. It was dark. I know that's an obvious statement, but this was a kind of dark I'd never seen before. I could see stars that I'd never seen before, but I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I grab a flashlight from my bag, as does Harrelyn from hers. We turn them on with what seemed like the loudest click my flashlight has ever made. That's when I noticed how silent it was. I couldn't hear any wild animals or crickets chirping. It was eerie, to say the least. "What's in your bag?" I asked Harrelyn to break the silence. "Just some EVP equipment, some thermal cameras, just some basic ghost hunting tools." "Sounds like you ready to start your own TV show," I chuckled. If looks could kill, I would have been dead where I stood. She obviously didn't appreciate that one. "Those shows are bullshit. They don't know what they're doing." I could see she was passionate about this topic, so I didn't push it any further. "There it is!" she gasped, her flashlight fixed on the old bridge. Her pace increased and I tried to keep up, but she reached the bridge before I could. This was your typical old bridge. Concrete road with steel beams coming up and over the road in a crisscross pattern. I couldn't tell if the beams were supposed to be red or just rusted over time. I scanned the bridge for the "This way to Goatman" sign I was hoping for, but no luck. I noticed Harrelin reached for her cell phone in her back pocket. "Just in time," she said with a smile on her face. "Just in time for what?" I asked. "Just in time to summon the Goatman," she said, with way more enthusiasm than I expected. "Summon? What do you mean summon? I thought this was just gonna be some ghost and hung around the bridge. You're making this sound like some kind of demon or something," I said, starting to actually feel a little nervous and uneasy about the whole thing. "Ah, are you scared right now?" Harrelin asked with a huge smile across her face. "Look, these things usually end up being nothing. Best case scenario, I'll pick up an EVP or catch something on my thermal camera." "Okay, well, do we have to summon the Goatman?" I asked, poorly hiding any nervousness in my voice. "Legend says that if you knock 3 times on the steel beams, exactly at midnight, he'll appear to you." I look at my phone to see that we're about 5 minutes away from midnight. Harrelin begins unpacking some equipment from her bag. She sets her thermal camera up on a tripod facing the opposite direction from which we approach the bridge. She turns on some special voice recorder that she tried explaining to me, but I couldn't really follow what she was saying. She checks the camera one more time to make sure it's just right. She approaches one of the now ominous looking red steel beams with her phone in one hand, the other balled into a fist and raised just above her head, waiting to strike the steel at exactly midnight. I'm standing just a few feet away from her, frozen with uncertainty about what's about to happen. The eerie silence is broken when Harrelin knocks 3 times on the steel beam, each resounding with an echoing metallic bang that seems to go on forever. We both hold our breath waiting for something to happen, but we only hear more silence. I start to move my flashlight off of Harrelin and towards the surrounding trees. I turn in a full circle before returning my light back to her, and I can see the disappointment written all over her face. I start to suggest that we just go hit a bar and let me buy her a couple of drinks, but I barely get the words out of my mouth before we heard a loud crack in the trees. The kind of sound you hear when something heavy steps on a dried twig. We both jumped and trained our flashlights on where the sound came from, yet, for some reason, we were facing the opposite direction from the other. I was facing the east side of the bridge, and Harrelin the west. We both exchanged confused glances as to how this could happen. Why was she facing that direction? The sound clearly came from behind me. I wish that had remained the worst thing about this experience, but things got way worse. While we were trying to figure out why the other one was wrong, we heard the most grim sound come from, well, all around us. It started kind of quiet at first, and grew louder and louder. It was the scream of a goat, but not just a goat. It sounded like a goat and a man were screaming together at the same time, but from the same source, as if they were one being. I kept trying to figure out which direction the sound was coming from, but the more I moved across the bridge, the more the screams seemed to move with me. Like the sound was coming from east and the west side of the bridge at the same time. Harrelin and I seemed to meet in the middle of the bridge, just behind her camera. That's where all the screaming seemed to meet up at the same location. We both spun around to train our flashlights on the sound, and that's when we saw him, or it, or whatever this thing was. It was a man. Well, at least the body was. There were 2 legs, a torso, and 2 arms with human hands on the end of each, all of which were covered in muscles that seemed to flex and retract with every breath this thing took. Its breathing was loud, much louder than any human I've ever heard, but that may be due to the fact that this thing did not have the head of a human. Instead, sitting on top of this thing's shoulders was the head of a goat, and not a small goat. This thing was the proportion to the rest of the body. The fur was a deep black, with solid black eyes to match. 2 massive horns protruded from its skull and pointed towards the back of its head. 2 large ears just sat beneath its horns, jutting straight out. The most disturbing thing about all of this had to be where the goat head met the human body. It seemed as if they had been crudely stitched together. Each point where needle would have met skin was still bleeding, as if this thing was recently created or the wounds just never healed. I noticed Harrelin was no longer watching this beast, but instead looking down at a thermal camera to see if it was picking this up. I could see her eyes widen when she realised it was. Something like this could make her famous and most likely ignite the world of paranormal investigation. Our attention was quickly taken away from the camera and focused back on the Goatman when it let out another horrifying scream. Its mouth wide open, exposing its long, yellow teeth and lengthy black tongue. When it finished its deafening scream, it charged towards us. I immediately turned and bolted back for the car. Harrelin, however, tried to grab her camera before running away. "Harrelin, leave it!" I screamed. Just as she picked up the camera and turned to run, the Goatman grabbed her by the back of her neck with a grip that she would not be able to break free from. I thought he would come for me too, but he just stopped and stared at me with Harrelin writhing and screaming in his grasp. I stood frozen, wanting to help her, but knowing there was nothing I could do. I don't carry weapons on me, and I don't think weapons would help in this situation anyways. Harrelin looked me in the eyes with this look I'll never forget. Her face conveyed a look of pure terror that I'll never, ever see before or since. The Goatman quickly turned and ran back into the woods, dragging Harrelin behind him. Her screams got even worse when he realised there was a fate coming that we were both unsure of. I know the sensible thing would have been to get in the car and drive far away from here, but I couldn't bring myself to just leave without her. I started chasing after Harrelin and the Goatman, crossing the bridge and heading into the woods. There was no path to follow, so all I could do was follow Harrelin's screams. I ran for what felt like an eternity. I could feel my lungs burning and my side beginning to cramp. I could hear the screaming getting closer and louder, so I must have been heading in the right direction, even though I had lost all sense of direction. I came to an abrupt halt when I entered into a small clearing. Oh God! What I saw next nearly made me vomit. In the clearing was one giant oak tree surrounded by what must have been dozens of these goat people holding torches and making that same noise that the Goatman was making on the bridge. Except these weren't screams like we heard earlier, but more like a chanting, as if I'd stumbled upon some ritual. Sitting upright at the base of the tree was Harrelin, but she was no longer screaming. In fact, she wasn't doing anything at all. I couldn't tell if she was dead or just unconscious. Her body was completely limp and leaning against the tree. I saw one of these goat people enter the circle walking towards Harrelin, and I realised it was the one we saw on the bridge. He wasn't holding a torch like the others, however. He was holding the head of a goat up in the air like it was a prized possession. The chanting seemed to get louder and faster the closer he got to her. When he was standing over her unconscious body, he brought the goat head down with enough to make Harrelin's head disappear inside of it, as if she was wearing it as a Halloween mask. He then reached to the tip of one of its horns and snapped off a piece a couple of inches long and began sewing the severed goat head into Harrelin's skin. There seemed to be some sort of sinewy thread attached to the end that he broke off. I could hear the sickening sound of his horn piercing her skin and this thread being pulled through the wound. When he was finished, he put the thread in his mouth and used his teeth to bite off the unused sinew. He stuffed what was left back into his horn. The chanting from the onlooking goat people grew to that level where it seemed to be coming from all around me. The Goatman placed his hand on Harrelin's forehead, or what was now her new forehead, and let out a deep, guttural yell. I watched Harrelin's body come back to life, slowly at first, her hands feeling her new goat head. She let out what seemed to be like a scream of sadness and disbelief, her open mouth revealing the same rotting teeth and black tongue that we saw earlier. She slowly rose to her feet and took in her surroundings. What I assumed was now her new family. Her head jerked towards me and she pointed in my direction. They all turned to look at me, and I knew I had to get out of there. I wasted no time in turning and running away as fast as I could. I wasn't sure if I was headed in the right direction, but I could hear their voices in the distance behind me. I just kept running. I couldn't let them turn me into one of those things. I somehow found the bridge again and realised that I could no longer hear them behind me. I raced to Harolyn's car and jumped inside. Thank God she left the keys in the ignition. The engine came to life with a roar and I threw it into drive and took off. I didn't stop for any red lights or stop signs. It was so late by this point there weren't any other cars on the road. I drove back to my place and now I'm typing this to make sure no one goes trying to find the Goatman. Please, no matter what you hear, stay away from that bridge. I'm still shaking and I can't calm down. See, the thing is, and maybe I'm just going crazy, but I swear, if I'm really quiet, I can hear a goat's low bleat in the distance. Wow, fantastic story there. Absolutely loved that one. Hope you guys did too. Of course, please do let me know down below in the comments. Please do like and share. If you haven't subscribed to DMT, smash that subscribe button and the notification bell to stay up to date with all DMT content. And why not head over to Facebook, guys, and join my Facebook private group, DMT's Cabin in the Woods. Love to see you there. Remember, guys, if you have a friend that's into paranormal investigations, I suggest going to see an old, derelict bridge or building. Pack extra batteries and your flashlights, but above all, make sure that you be safe and not sorry.